Hello, everybody. What's going on? Welcome inside an all-new episode of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. My name is Matt Robinson. Thank you for joining me here today. It's a good-looking show, as you saw in the title before you clicked on this. Our buddy Dan Shulman back on the podcast. It's been a couple of months. We try not to bug Dan too often. He's a pretty busy guy. But he's involved with a beer. And when that happened, there was really no way around it. I had to come knocking again. I had to see what was going on and how he got involved with it. We'll, of course, get into some Blue Jays talk, maybe a little FIBA basketball talk, all of that with Dan Shulman coming up here in just a minute. Give us a follow on social media at Tall Can Audio, and make sure you're subscribed to the podcast wherever you're hearing us right now. If you're enjoying everything that we're putting out, we'd love to have you on board, either on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are. Go ahead and give that follow button a press. We appreciate it. And in case you missed it, on Tuesday morning, our buddy Matt Conis-Vito was in here. Matt, of course, has worked for a long time over at TSN 1200. We went in depth with him on some craft beer talk. Really, really bright guy when it comes to music, so we had quite a bit to talk about there. And then, of course, he's been hosting those pre- and post-game shows for the Ottawa Red Blacks this season as well. So you'll want to go back and hear what he had to say about them, as it's been a fairly tough season once again for the Ottawa Red Blacks and their fans in the CFL. And before that, Rob and I got, that was a 2-hour show, a 3-beer show. We don't have too many 3-beer shows anymore, but we had tons to talk about there. The Sens, the Leafs, the Penguins, the Blue Jays. Man, it was a busy episode of the podcast. Rob had been away for a couple of weeks, so we had lots to catch up on. So lots up on the podcast feed right now at tallcanaudio.com or wherever you're hearing us. Go back and check out some of that. And like I said, stick around, because we're gonna keep the good stuff coming for you. With that all out of the way, let's bring him in. Our guest today from Sportsnet and the Toronto Blue Jays broadcast team, Dan Shulman's here. How you doing today, Dan?
I'm well, Matt. How you doing?
I'm not too bad at all. And look, there's a few different things that I want to ask you about here today. We got to talk some Blue Jays. We're going to talk a little FIBA. But you know where I have to start, because at some point here when we had you on, you said you're a beer guy, but not a huge beer guy. And then I see the news that you are involved in a craft beer with Left Field. And at that point, I try not to bother you too often, but I had to come knocking, Dan. So tell us, how did you get involved with this?
So involved might even be a little bit too strong, but we actually did it last year. So the backstory is Left Field Brewery, which is this wonderful little family-owned microbrewery in Toronto, and they're huge baseball fans. Before COVID, I guess I was at an event with them somewhere, and they said to me, "Hey, would you like to collaborate on a beer?" And I said, "Sure," and not even knowing what that means. And then COVID hit, and the world shut down, and all that. And then fast forward 2-3 years, and we just kind of picked up the paper trail again. And I said, "Sure," and they said, "Come on in, and we can talk about it." And I said, "Great." I said, "I've got somebody I know who knows a lot more about beer than I do. Can I bring him in as well?" And they said, "Sure." And that somebody was John Schneider.
Oh, nice.
Who at the time was the bench coach, not the manager.
Sure.
And so we went in and spent time with them, and they talked about what kind of beer and asked us some questions, and we decided on an IPA, and we chose what kind of hops and what kind of, fruity aftertaste we wanted, and what percentage alcohol and all that. And obviously they're doing 99.99% of the work, and they're just kind enough to involve us. And a few months later, this is last year now, they rolled out one called Magic Number. And they just make, I guess for these specialty beers, these are like one-offs. They just do one big giant, I don't even know what you'd call it, a keg or vat or so. And then they did it again this year and did a different one. So this one is called Frozen Rope. So Schneid and I are, barely involved. I think Schneider chose the name Magic Number last year, and I chose the name Frozen Rope. And if you look at the label, for each of them, you'll see a little tiny kind of homage to each of us. Magic Number, I believe, had number 14 on it, which is his number, and a pair of headphones for me. And then I think this year there's kind of a silhouette of him leaning over the railing, and there's a microphone for me or something like that. So, and then they invite us down for the little the cut the ribbon party. And we have a nice afternoon, pose for a couple of pictures, and drink some beer, and that's all she wrote.
Is this is an IPA, if you're going to sit down on a summer day and have a beer, is that sort of a go-to for you, or how did you land on that type of beer?
That's where I deferred to Schneid and the beer people on that. So I like an IPA. I also like a lighter lager. I think you and I had this conversation once before. And my brother-in-law, he's the same age as me, and we're kind of in the same boat. As we get older, our beer tastes are getting a little lighter, both, So they have Left Field Brewery also has one that's simply called Ice Cold Beer, which is their best-selling lager, I believe, and I'm a big fan of that. So I can go either way. I'm not going to drink anything too dark or too heavy. That's just always been a little bit too much for me. But, an IPA, a Pilsner, a lager, anything like that, I'm happy with.
Well, it's funny because that ice cold beer I talked about a week or two ago when one of the other bald baritones from Sportsnet, Tim McAuliffe, was on the podcast. And he was said exactly what you were saying, that, as I get a little older, I'm looking to tone it back just a little on some of this. And he asked us to give him some suggestions, and ice cold beer is the one that I said. It's a local brewery. It's not too overpowering, and it is awesome on a hot summer day.
It's great.
So, yeah.
It's absolutely great on a hot day because it's an ice cold beer. That's exactly what it is. and so I have some of those, and I have some of frozen rope in my fridge, and also, as luck would have it, near where my wife and I and our son live, there's this little kind of hole in the wall pizza joint. And they, I believe, literally have two different beers on the menu. I don't know what the other one is, but one of them is ice cold beer.
Oh, wow.
Like, you're not walking in there and getting a blue or a Canadian or a Coors Light or a Miller Light or whatever. And just by happy coincidence, it's an ice cold beer. And we go there every couple of weeks on a Sunday night after my game. And I'm very happy to support Left Field Brewery in that tiny way, but super nice people, super big Blue Jay fans, so it's been nice to get to know them.
Well, we did place an order there from Left Field because we had to try this, and once I found out that you and I were going to be chatting in the morning, I felt like that wasn't going to be a great time to be sampling it, so we had it on the show the other day. There, a couple of us, we were enjoying it quite a bit, so we can certainly recommend the frozen rope. The frozen rope, yeah. It's
good, isn't it?
It really is nice, yeah. It's got a little mango really flavor to it, kind of a little tropical. It's a gorgeous beer.
Yeah, it's really nice. I'm thrilled with it, and my fee was a 2-4. That's what they gave me for that. So I think I'm about halfway through them now. My nighttime routine when I get home from a weeknight game is kind of 50-50. It depends if my wife is awake or asleep when I get home. But if she's asleep, it's me and the dog and a beer and watch a West Coast baseball game for about half an hour to wind down before I go to bed.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about some baseball, but I want to first start with what you did there around the beginning of September, end of August, calling the FIBA tournament and what Team Canada did over at the World Cup. Can you just first maybe tell us a little what your day was like? Because some of these games there was a couple, I think 4:30 a.m. starts on the same day as some Blue Jays action. How'd you manage to balance all that?
Yeah, so FIBA, Canada basketball has always been kind of this little side passion of mine. But there's never been that much that I've been able to do simply because most of it was not on television. Mm-hmm. In 2015, was it 15 or 16? 15, I guess it was, the FIBA Americas. I did that with Leo Routens. That's when Canada lost to Venezuela in a heartbreaker in Mexico City and didn't go to the Olympics. And then I did the Victoria qualifier in 2020 when they lost in a heartbreaker. If they've lost in a heartbreaker, sadly, unfortunately, I think I've been on the game. But one of the best things, just selfishly, was when Sportsnet acquired the rights to Canada basketball a couple of years ago. And 10 seconds later, I called my boss and I begged. And I said, let me do whatever I can do. I know I can't do all of it, baseball and all that, and ESPN college basketball, but let me do what I can do. So I was thrilled when I found out we were going to be televising the World Cup, and it was kind of a blessing and a curse. The curse was the games were taking place in Indonesia and the Philippines, so they were at crazy hours over here.
Right.
But the blessing was that's what actually allowed me to kind of double dip and do that and the Blue Jays at the same time. So the World Cup was a 17-day period from a Friday until 2 Sundays later. Blue Jays were home for a week, gone for a week, and then back for the weekend of the last weekend of the World Cup. So I did not go on the Blue Jay road trip to Colorado and Oakland. I wouldn't have been able to do the FIBA. So kind of like in February, when we knew the FIBA schedule and knew the Blue Jay schedule, we sorted that out. But I had to go to my bosses and say, here are the game times for FIBA. Here are the Blue Jay times. Excuse me. I can do this. That I did the Olympics. I did basketball for the Olympics for CBC a couple of years ago.
Right.
And that, again, was remote, and that was in Tokyo. So a lot of the same stuff. Excuse me. I'm sorry. And kind of convinced my boss, who knows I'm a bit of a workhorse, that I can pull I can manage this. So it was kind of different every day, but the FIBA games were either 4:30 in the morning or 8:30 in the morning. And then the Blue Jay games, depending on what day of the week it was, were either 7 at night, or if it was a Saturday, 3 p.m., or if it was a Sunday, 1:30 p.m. So it just worked out great. I mean, great in the sense that I was able to do both, not great in the sense that I got much sleep. So for the 4:30 a.m.s, my alarm would go off at 2:30 a.m. And I'd be in the car at 3 and at the studio at 3:30, by 3:30, and the game would start at 4:30. I'd be done at 6:30, and I'd go back home and I'd go back to sleep for 2-3 hours. And it depended if my game was 1:30 that day or 7 o'clock that night for the Blue Jays. So part of the issue was not getting a lot of sleep. Part of the issue was having to prepare, like, I've got the Blue Jays and the Red Sox tonight, and then I've got Canada and Latvia at 4:30 in the morning tomorrow. and so I was joking with, they'd send me an email or a text, hey, do you want to do this? And I'd say, I'm kind of up to my eyebrows in Latvia right now, so I can't talk to you about the Blue Jays. But I don't know if I could. If I had to do it another week, I could have done another week. But it was tiring. I think we did 8. Canada played 8 basketball games. So in a 17-day period, I did like 10 or 11 Blue Jay games and 8 basketball games, and just kind of set multiple alarms and make sure you shave the night before, and you go do it. But again, I begged to do it. I loved doing it, and I'm thrilled that it worked out.
You find yourself like accidentally throwing down a Latvian basketball player's name standing at the plate that night, or any near misses like that?
No, I managed to avoid that. The worst one of those that I did was last year. I was doing Duke in North Carolina. And at the end of the game, Duke, the Blue Devils, had beaten North Carolina. And as they're walking off the floor, I said, what a win for the Blue Jays, instead of what a win for the Blue Devils. And then coincidentally, the Duke head basketball coach is John Shire, which is kind of close to John Schneider. But I never mixed those up. But my first day of spring training, I walked into the complex in Dunedin, like literally my first day. And the first guy I see, because his locker is right near the door, is George Springer. And as soon as I walk in, he's pointing at me and laughing. And I'm going, what? And he goes, you said Blue Jays at the Duke game. So I think that's the kind of the worst crossover one I've ever done. But you know what? You make fun of yourself and you smile and you move on.
One of the cool things about this qualifier was, having your call on it gave it that kind of big time feel, right? Sometimes you get an international feed, you don't really know who, whatever, but this is somebody that sports fans in Canada know this voice, know that this means this is a big deal. And I said to Tim a couple of weeks ago that I'm a casual basketball fan at best. I'm not watching Raptors Sacramento on a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. If they're in the playoffs, I'll check it out. But I haven't missed any of these Canadian qualifying tournaments. I'm one of those people who, if it's wrapped in the maple leaf, you've probably got my attention, despite how hard they've tried to push me away with some of those disappointing losses and what was going on. But it really seemed to catch on this summer. Tim and I were talking a little about how he said the basketball and for a little while until lately, Canadian men's soccer was the same way. It wasn't getting that same, maple leaf love that often it does. This summer felt different. Is it, in your opinion, just some of the bigger names getting involved, the legitimate opportunity to get on a run here, or what was different about this Team Canada?
It's two things. They got more of the top players committing, for one. So at the World Cup in 2019, as an example, I'm trying to remember exactly. Corey Joseph was on the team. Dwight Powell was on the team. Kem Birch was on the team. But it wasn't nearly as good a team as this. So one, you had 7 NBA players, whereas in past you'd have 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big part of it. And like you were saying, and like and like I know, there'd been a lot of heartbreak before. So a lot of people were kind of, geez, I don't know if I want to emotionally invest in this again if I'm just going to get my heart broken. But I think It starts with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like when Shai is in, and I mean Shai is in, and his cousin is Nickeil Alexander-Walker, so he's in.
Right.
You've got Olynyk and Powell who have been lifers, and then Lou Dort shows up, and he's terrific. And obviously R.J. Barrett is there. And then maybe what put it over the top was Dylan Brooks. I didn't think Dylan Brooks would be on this team. I really didn't. But Dylan Brooks committed, and as anybody who watched the games knows, Dylan Brooks committed. I mean, he played his rear end on this. So I think the biggest thing is getting stars, getting Shai, getting Dylan Brooks, that sort of thing. The second thing, which I kind of already mentioned in a different light, is the games were on TV. And it used to be crazy hard to find them,
yes.
And I was one of those weirdos who would wake up at 5 a.m. to watch them play, the U.S. Virgin Islands or Colombia or whatever they're doing. But there aren't that many of us weirdos, You put it on TV and it's a lot easier to find the game. So I think that was a big part of it. I have some friends, like some of my closest friends, huge basketball fans, but Raptor fans. Mm-hmm. Like a week before this, I'm like on our WhatsApp chat, and I said, "Are you boys fired up for the France game Friday?" And like nobody knows what I'm talking about. And that has changed. They now, are they still bigger Raptor fans or Canada fans? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Like there's room in our lives for both, right? Sure. And if you ask me, the basketball I invest more of my energy in than anything else is Canada basketball over even college that I work on or the NBA. But a lot of people still didn't know this was coming and still don't, and this is not their fault, still didn't understand and don't understand the qualification process because it's very convoluted. But I would say, for every person who knew all about this before, I bet you there's 5 or 10 people, that many 5 or 10 times as many people who know about it now. And the beauty of them qualifying in the World Cup is instead of 9 or 10 months of angst, where's the last chance tournament going to be? Who are they going to be with? Who's going to commit? They're in, right? They're in. And now really the biggest question is, will Jamal Murray play if Denver goes deep into the playoffs? And will they supplement the roster a little bit with guys who didn't commit last time? But those are okay. Those questions are okay. And I'm thrilled with how it turned out. People worked so hard to get them to this level. And, I don't know if they can be on the podium. I think they'll need, to add to their team a little bit to make the podium in the Olympics. But just the fact that they are there is a huge, wonderful step for this program.
Well, you mentioned staying out of those last chance tournaments, man. There are some European powerhouses who I'm sure did not expect that they were going to have to be in them. So that'll be it's good to be out of the way and not involved in that. Last thing on this, I am curious because I even basketball fans, Raptors fans, probably aren't watching a lot of OKC games, right? Is SGA always this good? Or in your opinion, did he take it to another level for Canada? Or were we just underestimating what he was?
Right. So I'll freely admit I don't watch a ton of NBA at this point in my life, between having a 4-year-old doing the Blue Jays and then doing college basketball all winter. But he averaged 31 points per game and was first-team All-NBA. Yeah. So, that even if you've never seen him play, if you just look up his numbers online, you go, whoa. So I think I think we all went into this hoping he would be one of the best players in the tournament. But as FIBA fans are aware, some guys are better in FIBA than they are in the NBA. Some guys are worse. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of those, like Dennis Schroeder, for example, Raptor now. Yep. Better in FIBA. Kelly Olynyk, better in FIBA. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think, has shown that he's equally outstanding in both. They needed him to be their best player, and he was after, say, the first half of the first game against France. Sorry, my dog is barking.
No problem.
I don't know what's going on, but she's excited about something. So they needed him to be their best player, and I think it took him a while to get the feel for it. He played, I think, in 2 or maybe 3 qualifier games, but those aren't as intense, and the level of competition was good, but not as good as what they saw in the World Cup. And as you know, I was doing the game with Alvin Williams, and he and I would talk a lot because he hadn't really covered FIBA before, and he never played FIBA. He never played internationally. And he looked at me like after the first game, or, we went out for a beer one night, And he said, this is totally different. He goes, this is so much harder. He said, in the NBA, if the ball's on the weak side, you're just kind of standing around a little bit. He goes, not in FIBA. Like, they're always reversing the ball, back screen, cross screen, down screen. Like, it never stops. The ball moves, and it's more physical. And you saw how many times Shea got knocked to the court, and then had to get up and make free throws. And I will maintain, with every bit of the small basketball knowledge I have, a 40-minute FIBA game is more physically and mentally intense than a 48-minute NBA game. You will not be able to convince me otherwise. And until guys step into that environment, I think it's – and another thing, I don't think as much of that comes across on TV as it should. And I wish it did. You know, we're taking a FIBA World feed, which, if people don't know what that is, it's not like Sportsnet had 12 cameras over there. We weren't shooting our own show. That's a world feed. And what people saw in Canada – is exactly what they saw in Latvia and Lithuania and France and Australia and everywhere around the world. But then what you do is every country has its own announcers, if you so choose, which Sportsnet chose. So I think FIBA does a wonderful, wonderful job with a lot of things. But the intensity of the crowd, the noise in the building didn't jump off the screen at me. And I wish it had. I think it's very intense. So, but I thought Shea was spectacular, and I thought Dylan Brooks was spectacular. And anything less than spectacular for both of those guys, they don't win a bronze, obviously. They had to go to overtime to win it. And they might not even be in the Olympics. Like, look how narrowly they got there. They had to beat Spain, must-win game, and they're down 12 at the end of the third quarter.
After coming back from down 10. Like, you get all the way out of it
down 10,
and do it again.
Then do it again. Garuba dunks on them, like, right at the end of the third quarter, like, just like the game's over, right? They're getting run off the court in transition at the end of the third quarter, and somehow they dig deep and win that game. They beat France, Latvia, Spain, the United States, Slovenia. They had a spectacular tournament, absolutely spectacular tournament, and Shea was the biggest part of that. And, you know, for years and years and years, Corey Joseph was the leader in the face of the program, and wonderfully so. Did unbelievable stuff for that program. Now you've got one of maybe the 5 or 6 best basketball players in the world who's the face of the program. And again, like I said, he's emotionally invested in this, and you can see that. And as long as Shea is there, Canada can compete with just about anybody.
Well, they were wonderful broadcast. Congratulations to you and your team on that. I'm one of those people who, you know, maybe I'm a little jaded, I'm a little cynical, and like I said, as a casual basketball fan, and yet there it is on a Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. I am up, I'm engaged, I am locked into this. So congratulations to you guys on that. I do have to take you to the Blue Jays, and everything. The most common question that I have been told to ask you is, are we getting Dan on the playoff games if they get in this year? Last year, you were moving on to cover it, I believe, for ESPN. And so people want to know, will you be with the Jays this year?
Yes, I will. So this is actually the first time I'm speaking about this publicly. Gorgeous. So it's as you and I talk, because, you know, as you know, people listen on different days. Mm-hmm. It is Wednesday morning right now. So the Blue Jays are about to play Garrett Cole and the Yankees tonight, and they have not clinched a playoff spot. So, you know, I'm not jinxing anything. I'm just answering a hypothetical question here. But yes, if the Blue Jays make the playoffs, Sportsnet will be continuing its own broadcast, and this is the first year where I am not with ESPN Radio for the playoffs. And, you know, to put it simply, I had a contract with ESPN, and you know, incredible, wonderful opportunity. I've done the last 12 World Series for ESPN Radio. But, you know, year to year, I've been kind of transitioning back to the Blue Jays more and more, from, you know, doing more games in the regular season. Would you like me to tell my dog to be quiet, or are you okay?
He's just as excited as we are that you're about
to... He's excited. Well, let me open the door here and see what's going on. Hang on one second. Oh, okay. All right. I'm back. She's going out for her walk. That's right.
Okay.
So yes, as I've been, you know, back and back doing more and more games, like I came back initially in 2016 and was only doing about 30 games. So obviously that number has increased. And when I found out, I guess last year, that Sportsnet would be allowed to do its own broadcasts in the playoffs, which for people who don't know, we're the only team/network that can do that because we don't infringe on Fox's ratings or TBS's ratings or anything like that because we're tucked away in this other country. Right. So, I just couldn't. I didn't want to be here all season and then not be here in the postseason. So this is the year when, I'm still with ESPN doing college basketball, but I've given up the radio for the playoffs. And it was done for this reason. It was done so I could stay with Sportsnet and do Blue Jays games in the postseason, fully understanding that if they don't make it, I don't work in October.
Right.
But at this point of my life, this is where I want to be. Just like the Canada basketball, I'm not going to lie and say I'm not emotionally invested in how this team does. I'm from here. I grew up here. I went to games as a kid, and everybody I know in Canada roots for this team. So yes, I will. I think if and when they clinch, I will put something out on social media or something like that. But since you asked me a direct question, I gave you a direct answer.
I appreciate that, and Blue Jay fans will be excited to hear it, no doubt. And you kind of mentioned it, that it was no guarantee. It's still, as you and I chat, no guarantee that they will be in. I'm curious, you've been up close and watching this all season. I know you're on social media, so you probably are fairly familiar with how the fan base has felt. I guess frustrated almost all year would be just about the best word I could paint for the fans.
Yeah.
It's been almost counterintuitive, and I'm just as guilty of it as anybody, but they've never been out of it. They've never looked like there's no chance they were going to make the playoffs. All season long, they've looked like a pretty good team, but maybe just not as good as we expected, or the way they were losing would be extra frustrating. I'm curious, as someone who's been up close and watching it, are you getting the same vibes when you talk to the fan base or hear the fan base? Is that frustration carrying through the organization, or are they somewhat isolated from it? What's your view of this thing been? Because it's never been quite as bad as it's felt.
Yeah, I agree. For there in 2021, when they scored 1 million runs, the fans were in love with this team. And I think, I don't know if I'm right, but I think fans are more likely to be frustrated with a team that is struggling to score than a team that is struggling to pitch well. I think when Vladdy's hitting a zillion home runs and Marcus Semien and Teoscar had a big year and all that stuff, that there's more action in those games. So I think fans, all things being equal, a 90-win offensive team versus a 90-win pitching team, I think fans are more likely to be happy with a 90-win offense team and less happy with a 90-win pitching team. The players feel it. The players are aware of it. The expectations were sky high this year. The funny thing is, so there are, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, the Dodgers, and the Braves. Those 4 teams, their records are significantly better than anybody else. After that, it's a mishmash. Texas, Toronto, Houston, Seattle, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at the division the Blue Jays play in, and it's a much harder division than any other division, I actually don't even know if this is an opinion. They've been the 5th best team in baseball this year, because if they played in another division, they'd have more wins. So, but I agree and understand why fans have felt disappointed. And I think the reason they have felt disappointed, again, one is they just haven't hit. And I think that bothers fans, hit as much as we thought they would.
Sure.
I think that bothers fans a lot. The funny thing is they're 15th out of 30 in runs scored. So their average, half the teams in baseball are worse than they are offensively. But I know it doesn't feel like that to the fans. The other thing I think as well is there have been some very high-profile players who have not had the kinds of years that were expected of them. One is Vladdy, obviously, and it's amazing to say with a guy who's got 24 homers and 93 RBIs,
yeah.
But I get it. There's more in there, and we've seen it. Alejandro Kirk, not close. Springer's had his ups and downs, although he's finishing strong. Mm-hmm. And then the whole Alek Manoah thing was another big story. I mean, even if they don't score one more run than they've scored, if Alek Manoah just has a decent season, they're comfortably in the playoffs at this point. So I understand the frustration. And I think the front office put together a team that should have done more, to be honest. I think this is on the players, right? So, the players got to play as well as they're capable of. And there have been a few guys who just haven't quite been there this year. But they're still in it. They are still in control of their own destiny. If they go 3-2 in their last 5, they're in. If they go 2-3 in their last 5, they're almost assuredly in. They can even get in if they go 1-4, if some things roll right on the out-of-town scoreboard. And I do feel they are the team that if they get in, you don't want to play them in the playoffs. But, they've just not hit as much as we expected them to hit all season long. They didn't hit anything last night against Michael King and company. And can they beat good teams? Can they beat good pitchers with this lineup? It's 157 games in already.
Yeah.
So, maybe we have to accept this is who they are. And if they're going to do it, they're going to do it by winning 3-2 and 2-1, not 8-6 or anything like that. So, yeah, I understand the frustration. The players have felt the frustration, and I just hope they can find a way to do enough to get in.
Well, so last one for you then. You've kind of alluded to it already that if they do get in, this wouldn't be a team you would want to play. And I've sort of been wrestling with that a bit myself. In the playoffs, we know how important pitching is, and we know how important the bullpen is, and that is something the Blue Jays have in spades right now. But there's been some talk lately, and I believe Alex Anthopoulos was on the radio in Toronto. Maybe he was the one who stirred all this up a little bit. Was it you rarely string together 3, 4, 5 hits and play small ball in the playoffs quite the same way as occasionally needing to just thunder out a 3-run shot and do some damage all at once. And power really isn't something that this team has shown this year. I think they have it, but they haven't shown it. What makes you sort of say that this would be a team you'd be nervous about playing in the playoffs?
Well, one is the pitching and defense and the depth of the bullpen. Bullpens are so important in the playoffs, and I think they're a plus there. I think their pitching is, if they get in, their pitching is going to be better than just about anybody else they play. And Alex Anthopoulos is 100% right. It's been just kind of a bit of a false narrative that power isn't as important in the playoffs and small ball is more important. And I think the reason I didn't hear the interview, but I think the reason Alex probably talked about this, well, two things. He's right. It's hard to get 3 consecutive hits off a Sonny Gray or off a Kyle Bradish or off a Tyler Glasnow or whoever you're pitching against. You got to run into one every now and again. A higher percentage of runs come on home runs in the playoffs than they do in the regular season. And that's because the pitchers are better and it is harder to get 3 hits in a row. And the other reason, again, is just kind of holding out this hope that these guys can be who they've been. Mm-hmm. Springer has power. Bichette has power. Guerrero has power. And even down the list, Belt has some. Varsho has some. I think Danny Jansen's a big loss. I've always felt Danny Jansen is a big, big loss for this team. But, and other teams are dealing with injuries, too. If they play the Rays in the playoffs, the Rays are more banged up than the Blue Jays are. So, but I do think they missed Danny Jansen. But they were always destined to hit fewer home runs this year, I believe. But it's not just the they traded Teoscar and Gurriel and they brought in Varsho and Kiermaier. And you would expect fewer home runs in that exchange, but they gained a ton defensively and they gained a ton on the in terms of base running. It's the holdovers who haven't hit as many home runs.
Right.
Again, Springer's a little bit down. Vladdy hit 48 2 years ago. You want to throw it out? Throw it out. He hit 32 last year, so he's a little bit down. Springer's a little bit down. Varsho, I think, hit 25 or 27, I believe, last year with Arizona. He's at 18 this year. So, it's just Kirk's not hitting for as much power. Matt Chapman's been cold since April, right? He's got 15 home runs. 15 home runs. Chapman's a guy you would expect would be, even if he didn't hit for a high average, you would expect 25 home runs from Matt Chapman. It's the guys who were with them last year who haven't hit for as much power. So I guess the reason I think they could do it is because they have done it. But whether they can do it going forward, none of us knows.
No, and it's going to be a stressful couple of days here to finish out the season, and then should things go correctly, even more stressful next week. But we're glad to hear you'll be along for the ride, taking us through it. I always appreciate you making time for me, Dan. Like I said, I try not to bug you too often, but when I guess I'm a little late to the party, but when I saw there was a beer with your name on it, I had to reach out at that point.
No problem. It didn't surprise me to get your email.
Thanks so much, Dan.
All right, Matt. Be well.
So there he goes, and he made a little news while he was here. We like that. Dan Shulman will be on the Blue Jays broadcasts in the playoffs, should the Blue Jays themselves be in the playoffs. So very exciting. And, last year, Buck moved back from the color commentary position into play-by-play, which obviously he has plenty of experience with. And that is the broadcast we got last year, but this year they will stick with their A-team. It will be Dan Shulman and Buck Martinez. So very exciting there. That was fun. Always love that Dan makes a little time for us. And, like I said, once he kind of drifted, we all know what he does in the sports world, right? He is the voice of a lot of major Canadian sporting events. And but once he moved over into the world of beer, there was no chance that this show wasn't going to reach out and try and get him back on here. So that was great. Like I said off the top, Matt Connis Vita was in here on episode 1170. We had a lot of fun talking Red Blacks and some Senators with him and a lot of music. That was great. Tim McAuliffe was on the show not too long ago. All of this stuff is up at tallcanaudio.com. And just make sure you're subscribed on the pod wherever you're hearing us right now, and you won't miss out on anything in the future. No doubt we'll talk a little bit more Jays here as the season winds down, and hopefully some playoff baseball gets set in stone. We'll maybe reach out to some of our other friends on that front and see who might have a little time for us to talk about what that looks like. So stick around. Until then, my name is Matt Robinson. Thanks so much for listening to the Tall Can Audio Podcast. We'll see you next time.
That's it. I cannot work under these conditions. If anybody wants me, I'll be downstairs at McDougal. Call the weekend guy. I don't care.